"Don't touch that plate," the little girl said softly, her voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. "It's not an accident. It's a decision." She stood frozen beside a long banquet table where every child had already been served towering slices of birthday cake, except her. Her empty paper plate trembled in her small hands as she added, "They told her not to give me anything." No one understood what she meant yet, but across the room, a billionaire's fork stopped midair. It was 2:18 p.m. on a warm Sunday in Greenwich, Connecticut, when the Whitmore estate filled with the kind of noise that only money can buy for children. Live piano music drifting from the conservatory, crystal glasses clinking softly, and the sweet scent of vanilla frosting carried through air conditioning so cold it felt artificial. Every table in the ballroom had been arranged by height and privilege disguised as family seating, and every child wore something new except one. Amara Johnson stood near the end of the dessert table, her small shoes slightly too worn for polished marble floors. The hem of her blue dress, once neat, now carried the faint memory of laundry cycles and careful repairs. In her hands, she held a white paper plate so clean it looked almost out of place, too empty to belong in a room where everything else was overflowing. The smell of cake reached her first, then the sound of children laughing with frosting on their fingers. She didn't move toward them. Across the room, Daniel Whitmore, guest of honor and one of the estate's primary benefactors, set his champagne flute down without drinking. He wasn't smiling like the others. His attention had shifted to a small cluster of mothers near the dessert station, their voices low but sharp enough to carry pieces of meaning. Something about allocation, something about keeping consistency, something that didn't belong in a children's birthday celebration. A server passed behind Amara and hesitated for half a second, as if unsure whether she was supposed to exist in this part of the room. Then he moved on. The silence that followed wasn't loud, but it was heavy enough that even the piano seemed to hesitate between notes. Amara's eyes followed the movement of a child her age receiving a second slice of cake. Extra strawberries, extra cream, extra everything. Her plate remained empty. She didn't cry. She simply adjusted her grip on the plate as if it might explain itself if she held it long enough. "My mom said I'm on the list," she murmured, almost to herself, though no one was close enough to confirm or deny it. A woman nearby smiled politely without looking at her and said, "Sweetheart, maybe you misunderstood the seating arrangement." Daniel's fork, resting now against his plate, tilted slightly as his hand loosened. He wasn't sure why he was watching her instead of the celebration, but something about the stillness around that empty plate didn't match the noise of the room. It felt like a detail the world had tried to hide in plain sight. Then Amara looked down at her plate again, and inside the perfect white circle, she noticed a faint ink stamp bleeding through the paper from underneath the stack. 3 letters, barely visible, pressed into the fibers like a mistake that refused to stay hidden. N.O. The ink stamp under the plate kept repeating itself in Amara's mind like a whisper she couldn't unhear, even as a woman nearby gently pushed another slice of cake toward a different child and said, "Don't be shy, sweetheart." Amara didn't move. She only lifted her plate slightly, as if trying to prove to the room that it was still real, still hers to hold. Across the ballroom, Daniel Whitmore finally turned his attention fully away from the celebration and toward the dessert station, where a staff member was now checking a clipboard with too much focus for something that was supposed to be simple. He didn't interrupt yet. He just watched. The kind of watching that doesn't belong to curiosity, it belongs to calculation. A second server passed behind the table, paused, then quickly adjusted a tray so it no longer faced Amara's direction. That small movement shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. Daniel reached for his phone, not to call anyone, but to take a single photo of the clipboard before it disappeared from view. The moment the camera clicked, the staff member looked up. Too late. Amara shifted her weight and glanced toward the kitchen doors where trays kept coming out in perfect rhythm. Her lips moved slightly as if she was counting something only she could hear. "They skipped me at 2:07, she said under her breath, not to complain, but to confirm it. A boy nearby with frosting on his cheek laughed loudly at something his mother said, and the sound filled the gap around her like water avoiding a stone. Behind the kitchen doors, a dishwasher hummed and a TV played softly. Morning news reruns no one was really watching. A faint smell of detergent mixed with buttercream drifted out every time the doors opened. Then, for half a second, the rhythm broke. A tray meant for Amara's section stopped mid-transfer. A staff member checked a second list, different color ink, different handwriting. Then, just as quickly, it was folded away. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked closer to the service station and asked the nearest coordinator, almost casually, "How many children are on the final cake list?" The woman blinked too quickly. "All confirmed guests," she answered. He nodded once, as if accepting it, but his phone was already storing another image, this time of a second document half hidden under a napkin stack. Amara, meanwhile, had moved just far enough to see behind the main table. There, taped under the edge of a serving board, she noticed something she shouldn't have been able to read at her height. A second label printed in small black text. It didn't match the festive signage. It wasn't even written for guests. It was internal. She tilted her head slightly, lips forming the words without sound, as if learning a truth she wasn't meant to understand yet. Exclude list, Tier C staff dependents. It read, and beneath it, her name appeared again, printed twice as if confirming itself. But beside her name, something had been scribbled in pen after printing, recently enough that the ink still looked darker than everything else. Hold until instructed. The words hold until instructed kept echoing in Amara's mind as she stood completely still behind the dessert table, her fingers tightening around the edge of the empty plate until the paper began to soften. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough to know it didn't belong on a birthday list. Across the room, Daniel Whitmore had already stopped pretending to observe casually. His gaze moved between the printed sheet, the staff movements, and the children being served, counting something invisible that didn't match what he was being shown. A woman in a cream dress stepped quickly between him and the service station, her smile too precise to be natural. "Everything is running smoothly, Mr. Whitmore," she said, slightly too fast, as if the sentence had been rehearsed. Behind her, a staff member reached for a stack of plates and accidentally dropped one. It shattered softly against the marble, but no one reacted except Amara, who flinched at the sound like it confirmed something already wrong. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He simply held up his phone again, this time showing a cropped image of the internal list. "Explain this line," he said calmly. The woman's eyes flicked down and then away in less than a second. "That's outdated formatting," she replied, forcing a small laugh that didn't reach her voice. "Probably a leftover print layer." But her hand was already moving behind her back, tucking something, her phone, or maybe a second sheet of paper, out of sight. Amara stepped forward without realizing she was doing it. Her small voice cut through the adult tension. "That's not what they said at 2:07, she said. A pause followed that was too sharp to be accidental. One of the nearby mothers bent slightly toward her, smiling tightly. "Sweetheart, maybe you're confused," she said. But Amara shook her head once, firmly. "No. I remember the time because the music changed right after." Daniel turned his head slightly toward her for the first time, not as a guest anymore, but as if aligning a missing piece. "What music changed?" he asked gently. Amara pointed toward the ceiling speakers. When the cake started for the other tables, the violin stopped for a few seconds. Then it came back. Her eyes stayed steady. "That's when they skipped me." The woman in cream inhaled sharply, just once, before recovering her smile. "Children don't usually track timing like that," she said lightly, but her tone had lost its comfort. A staff member near her quickly checked their watch and then pocketed it as if the gesture itself had betrayed something. From the corner of the room, a small security monitor mounted near the kitchen door flickered, just for a moment, before stabilizing again. Daniel noticed it. He didn't say anything, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if the flicker matched something he already suspected. Amara, still holding her plate, looked down again and noticed something new printed faintly along its rim, barely visible unless angled toward the light. A timestamp line, partially smudged, reading 2:07 to 2:11 hold sequence. She traced it with her thumb, then looked up at Daniel. "It wasn't just me," she said quietly. And for the first time, Daniel didn't correct her, didn't reassure her, didn't dismiss it. He simply looked back at the list, then at the staff, then at the room full of smiling children, and realized the timing on the paper wasn't describing a mistake. It was describing a pause that had been planned. The moment Daniel lowered his phone slightly, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted in a way Amara could feel before she understood it. 2 security staff in dark suits had already begun moving closer, not rushing, not aggressive, just precise, like they had been waiting for a signal. The woman in the cream dress stepped forward again, this time with a more controlled voice. "Mr. Whitmore, perhaps we should continue this discussion in a private setting," she said, glancing briefly at Amara as if the child herself was now part of a procedural issue. Amara instinctively stepped back half a step, but she didn't let go of the plate. The inked word along its edge still pressed faintly against her thumb like a bruise. Daniel noticed the movement of the security staff and raised one hand slightly, not to stop them, but to slow them. "No one is being removed," he said evenly. His tone was calm, but it carried a weight that made the nearest guard pause mid-step. The woman in cream smiled again, but it was thinner now. "Of course not," she replied. "We're simply avoiding confusion for the children. This is a celebration." She turned slightly toward Amara, lowering her voice into something designed to sound gentle. "Sweetheart, why don't you go sit with the other kids? There's nothing wrong here. You may have just misunderstood the schedule." Amara didn't move. Her voice stayed small, but steady. "I didn't misunderstand 207, she said. "I heard the music stop. I saw the cart skip my table." The room around her shifted in micro-reactions. Parents adjusting posture. A server suddenly very interested in their shoes. A coordinator stepping half a step backward toward the kitchen doors. Daniel's eyes moved to the coordinator instantly. "Pull the distribution log," he said quietly. The request wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The coordinator hesitated just long enough to reveal that there was something to hesitate about. "Sir, that's internal," she began, but stopped when Daniel simply held up his hand again. Behind them, a security guard leaned toward the woman in cream, whispering something too low to hear clearly. She nodded once, then turned back with a composed expression that no longer reached her eyes. "There may have been a temporary adjustment for logistical balance," she said carefully. "These events often require last-minute reallocations." Amara looked up at her, then at Daniel. "But I saw my name on the list," she said, "and then it was crossed out." The sentence wasn't emotional. It was observational. That made it heavier. A nearby mother let out a soft laugh that sounded more like discomfort than humor. "Children misread things all the time," she added quickly, as if trying to stabilize the room. But Daniel didn't look away from the coordinator anymore. "Show me the unedited version," he said. The coordinator's hand tightened around her tablet. A second later, the screen flickered, just briefly, and a notification appeared at the top. "Sync interrupted, 2:09 p.m. Amara noticed it before anyone else. She pointed without thinking. "That wasn't there before," she said quietly. And in that small, accidental exposure, the room went still in a way that had nothing to do with celebration anymore, because the timestamp on the screen didn't just show when something changed. It showed exactly when someone tried to hide it. Amara didn't wait for permission. Her small hands reached carefully into the side pocket of her dress, pulling out a folded piece of stiff paper that looked like it had been handled too many times for something meant to be formal. She held it up to Daniel without speaking at first, as if offering something fragile that might disappear if spoken too loudly. Daniel's attention shifted immediately. The coordinator tried to step in, but stopped when she saw his expression change. Amara unfolded the paper slowly. It was a printed invitation confirmation sheet, but the lower half had been physically cut and reattached with a thin strip of tape, mismatched by a few millimeters. On the top line, Amara's name appeared clearly. On the bottom, in a different font density, her name appeared again, followed by a handwritten note, "Hold until instructed." But it wasn't just the note that changed Daniel's expression. It was the timestamp in the corner of the document metadata printout, 2:07 p.m., the exact moment Amara had said the music shifted. Daniel took the paper without touching her fingers, as if preserving the chain of evidence mattered more than comfort. He turned it slightly toward the light. The tape seam wasn't recent, it had been replaced. Someone had tried to erase something and then corrected how they erased it. Behind him, the coordinator spoke quickly now, too quickly. That's just an administrative draft. Those aren't final allocations. But her voice lacked the stability it had minutes earlier. A server passing behind her slowed down, then turned away entirely when Daniel glanced up. Amara stayed close, not retreating. "They gave me that when we checked in," she said softly. "But they took it back when we got inside." She looked at the table again, where children were still eating cake, unaware that anything had changed. "Then they told me to wait near the end." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened his phone again and pulled up the security feed index from the ballroom system. A line of entries appeared neatly, time-stamped. One section stood out immediately. A missing segment labeled 207 to 214 buffer override. 7 minutes. Clean. Intentional. He didn't speak. He simply enlarged the line, then looked back at the coordinator. "Why is there a forced buffer override in the internal footage?" he asked. The coordinator swallowed, and for the first time her confidence fractured. "System maintenance," she said. "Temporary compression during high-traffic events." But Daniel had seen enough systems to know what maintenance looked like. This wasn't it. Amara, still holding the edge of her plate, pointed quietly toward the kitchen entrance. "That's where they took the cart after 207, she said. "I saw it go in full. Came out missing 3 trays. Daniel followed her gaze. The kitchen doors swung slightly as a staff member exited, then froze when they noticed him watching. The staff member adjusted their posture too carefully, like someone remembering how to behave rather than simply behaving. Daniel zoomed further into the security log. A second entry appeared beneath the missing footage note, an access override signed with a supervisory code. The name attached to it made him stop completely. He didn't look at Amara. He didn't look at the coordinator. He just stared at the screen for a long moment, longer than anyone in the room expected him to. Then very slowly he lowered the phone. And for the first time since the party began, Daniel Whitmore stopped trusting the person who had signed their name at the top of every operational sheet in the room. Daniel Whitmore didn't move for several seconds after reading the last line of the access log. The ballroom noise continued behind him. Cutlery, faint laughter, a child's high voice calling for more cake. But it all felt distant now, like sound passing through glass. He lowered his phone slowly, not because the information was unclear, but because it was becoming too clear in a way that demanded restraint instead of reaction. He stepped aside from the main table, not drawing attention, and spoke once into his phone. "Send me the original security feed from 2 to 220, uncompressed, and I want the authorization chain for every override during that window." His voice stayed calm, almost neutral, but the man on the other end of the line understood immediately and didn't ask questions. Amara stood a few feet away, watching him but not interrupting. She wasn't asking him to act fast. She wasn't asking him to punish anyone. She only held her empty plate tighter, as if the truth itself might spill if she let go. When Daniel glanced down at her, she simply said, "I just want it to be right. Not more cake. Not attention. Just right." A faint sound of rain began tapping against the tall glass windows of the estate, soft enough to almost be mistaken for the sound of distant applause. In the kitchen, a television played quietly, morning news reruns looping over a low hum of refrigeration and mechanical dishwashers. Life continued in fragments behind the scenes, unaware of how close it was to being interrupted. Daniel walked slowly toward a side corridor, away from the ballroom. He didn't rush. He didn't want anyone to notice the shift. In a quiet service hallway lit by recessed ceiling lights, he stopped beside a wall-mounted panel and opened another secure feed, this one older, archived. His assistant's voice came through the line again, confirming file transfer. "There's something else," Daniel said after a moment. "Cross-reference supervisory override signatures with event coordination logs for the last 6 months. I want inconsistencies flagged." On the screen, Rows of names appeared, clean, professional, familiar. One name appeared repeatedly next to approved event adjustments. Always precise, always trusted, always present in decisions that now looked different under the new light of timing gaps and edited sequences. Behind him, Amara had followed quietly, stopping at the edge of the hallway. She didn't understand the technical language, but she understood silence, especially the kind that meant someone was finally listening. A drop of rain slid down the glass beside her, distorting the reflection of both of them for a moment. Daniel opened another file, internal HR clearance records. One name appeared again, tied to both scheduling authority and guest allocation protocols. The same name that had signed off on the hold until instructed annotation. The same name that had authorized the buffer override. A faint vibration came from his phone. An incoming message preview from legal counsel asking if this was related to routine event audit procedures. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he enlarged a signature line and held it there longer than necessary. Something about the curvature of the handwriting felt familiar in a way that didn't belong to paperwork. Amara spoke softly behind him. "That's the person who told them to skip me," she said, not as a question, but as confirmation of something she had already decided was true. Daniel didn't answer immediately. The rain outside grew slightly heavier, tapping a steady rhythm against the glass like a metronome for something irreversible. He looked again at the signature, then at the override trail, then at the timestamps that now aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. And in that quiet hallway, away from the celebration, Daniel Whitmore realized he had trusted one voice in this entire system for far too long, and that voice had been shaping every version of the truth he thought he understood. The corridor outside the ballroom felt colder than it should have, even with the warmth of the estate still bleeding through the walls. Daniel Whitmore stood still for a moment, his phone angled downward, the screen showing a cascade of synchronized logs and signature trails that no longer aligned in a way that felt accidental. Amara stood beside him, small and steady, watching his face more than the screen, as if she had learned that truth always shows itself in adults before it shows itself in documents. Daniel didn't raise his voice when he spoke. "Bring me the event coordinator," he said into the phone. "Not security, not assistance, the coordinator." Then he paused. "And keep the ballroom feed recording live." He ended the call without waiting for acknowledgement. The calm in his tone was sharper than anger. It was certainty forming slowly. Amara shifted slightly, then pointed toward the far end of the hallway. "She was holding a black pen when she crossed the table," she said quietly. "Not a blue one like the others. It was a small detail, almost nothing, but she held on to it like it mattered more than anything else in the room. And she checked the clock on the kitchen wall twice before the music stopped." Daniel looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. "You noticed that?" he asked. "I notice when people wait for something to happen," she replied simply. A faint chime echoed from Daniel's phone. An incoming file transfer. Security footage reconstruction. 2 to 2:20 p.m. Uncompressed. He opened it immediately. The video buffered slowly at first, then resolved into the ballroom feed. Everything looked normal for exactly 7 seconds. Then a subtle shift. The dessert cart paused near Amara's table, and a staff member glanced toward the coordinator before stepping out of frame. Daniel zoomed in. The movement wasn't random. It was coordinated hesitation. Footsteps approached from behind them. The coordinator returned, flanked by 2 staff members who stood at a respectful distance. Her expression was composed again, restored like makeup carefully reapplied over tension. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, "I understand there may be some confusion regarding allocation protocols." Daniel held up his hand, not sharply, just enough to stop her sentence mid-flow. "No confusion," he said. "Only sequence." He turned the tablet toward her and played the reconstructed footage. The moment the dessert cart reached Amara's position, the video glitched slightly, not enough to hide action, just enough to make intent harder to see. But Amara's voice, already recorded from earlier sync, aligned perfectly with the timestamp. The coordinator's eyes flicked to the screen, then away. "That portion is not relevant to guest experience," she said carefully. Amara stepped half a pace forward. I was standing there, she said. I saw you look at the list before you crossed my name out. The coordinator's posture tightened almost imperceptibly. Sweetheart, there was a misunderstanding. Say it again, Daniel interrupted. Not louder, just colder. The room behind them, though distant, seemed to quiet through the open corridor like it was listening. A staff member passing by slowed, then stopped, entirely holding a tray too still to be natural. Somewhere in the ballroom, a spoon tapped against glass and didn't repeat. Daniel turned the tablet back to himself and tapped a highlighted signature field. Explain why your authorization appears on a filtered override layer at 209, when you were documented in the kitchen log at 208. Silence followed. Not confusion. Recognition of exposure. The coordinator's hand shifted slightly toward her side pocket, where a phone vibrated once, then again, but she didn't touch it. There are multiple systems running during high-capacity events, she said. Synchronization delays are expected. Amara looked up at Daniel. That's not what she said before, she whispered. Before, she said it was just logistics. Daniel nodded once, like storing that difference somewhere permanent. He placed the tablet on a nearby side table, screen still showing the overlapping logs, then looked directly at the coordinator. You're going to walk back into that room, he said calmly, and you're going to repeat exactly what you told my staff about allocation. A pause stretched, long enough that the humming of the building's ventilation system became audible. And if I refuse? She asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly so she could see the live ballroom feed on his phone. Every child still inside. Every camera still recording. Every second still being stored without compression now. Amara didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply held her empty plate tighter, like it had become evidence instead of absence. The coordinator finally exhaled, slow and controlled, and for the first time her eyes didn't stay fixed on Daniel. They moved to Amara, not with anger, with understanding that something had shifted beyond her control. Because in that moment, she realized the child she had been dismissing was no longer alone in what she had seen. The coordinator stood frozen in the hallway, the sound of her own breathing suddenly too loud in her ears, as Daniel Whitmore turned without another word and walked back toward the ballroom. Amara followed him closely, her small step steady, the empty plate still in her hands like something that had stopped being just paper a long time ago. The ballroom felt different now, not louder, stripped, as if someone had removed the soft layer of illusion that made everything look harmless. Conversations continued, but they didn't land the same way. Guests noticed Daniel returning, and slowly, one by one, their attention drifted toward the center of the room where he stopped beside the dessert table. On the main screen near the stage, used for birthday messages and photos, a new feed had been switched on. Daniel hadn't asked for it to be displayed. It was already there when he entered. The security feed, unedited, uncompressed, running live. The room shifted instantly. Amara stood slightly behind him, her fingers tightening around the edge of her plate. That's the part, she said quietly, pointing at the screen. Right there. Her voice wasn't emotional. It was exact. The footage showed the exact moment her name was crossed out on the internal allocation sheet. Not edited. Not blurred. The timestamp sat at 2:07 p.m. like a fixed point in time that refused to move. Then another angle appeared, kitchen coordination logs syncing in real time, revealing the override command signature layer directly under the coordinator's access ID. A lawyer standing near the side of the room stepped forward instinctively. Mr. Whitmore, this level of exposure, he began, but stopped when Daniel raised one hand without looking at him. Daniel was watching the screen now without blinking. Not the crowd, not the children, only the sequence of decisions unfolding in front of him like a structure he had unknowingly funded. A second file opened automatically beside the footage, digital reconstruction of authorization trails. Every skip, every delay, every hold until instructed entry aligned in a straight, deliberate pattern. Amara didn't move. She didn't need to explain anything anymore. She simply looked up at the screen and said softly, "They didn't forget me." The words landed differently now. No longer a complaint. A fact. The coordinator had re-entered the room from the side entrance. She stopped immediately when she saw the live feed. Her composure held for half a second too long, like a mask waiting for instruction that never came. The guests had gone silent without realizing they had done it. Even the music from the piano had not been adjusted to fill the gap. Daniel finally spoke, still facing the screen. Pause the external audio. The ballroom sound dropped instantly, replaced by the raw, unfiltered room noise from the recording. Chairs shifting, breath catching, the faint mechanical hum of servers switching feeds. The reality of the moment became unavoidable. On screen, Amara's plate had been visible the entire time. Empty, marked, logged, skipped. The system had recorded every omission as a decision, not an error. Daniel slowly turned toward the coordinator. Not quickly, not angrily, just completely. You authorized every override in that sequence, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. The coordinator's lips parted, but no explanation followed. Not because she had nothing to say, but because every possible version of her answer now existed on the screen behind her. Amara stepped forward one small pace, lifting her plate slightly. "This is mine," she said, and for the first time, her voice carried through the entire room without needing to be raised. "You wrote my name, then you took it away." A few guests looked down instinctively, as if the floor had changed beneath them. A server in the back set down a tray too carefully, hands no longer steady. Daniel removed his glasses slowly, not dramatically, just enough to see the screen without reflection. He looked at the full sequence one last time, the logs, the timestamps, the signature trail, the erased gap that was no longer hidden. Then he placed the glasses on the table beside the empty cake stand. And without raising his voice, he looked toward the legal team and said, "Call my attorney." The ballroom did not erupt. It softened like a held breath finally allowed to leave the body. Daniel Whitmore stood still beside the empty cake table as lawyers moved in quietly, not with spectacle, but with the controlled precision of people who understood what a recorded system meant in a legal environment. The coordinator was no longer speaking. She was listening to her own silence being documented in real time. Amara stayed where she was. She didn't move toward the noise, the questions, or the shifting adults. She simply looked at the screen where her name had been restored in the system logs, no longer crossed out, no longer delayed, no longer marked hold. It was just there again, as if it had always been there and someone had been pretending otherwise. Daniel finally broke his stillness. "Freeze all allocation systems tied to this event network," he said calmly to his attorney, "and isolate every override entry linked to the last 6 months of public engagements. No anger, no performance, just instruction." And that was what made the room change, because everyone understood that decisions made in that tone did not get undone. The coordinator was escorted to a side area without resistance, her heels clicking once, then stopping completely as if even sound no longer supported her position. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The evidence was already louder than any argument that could follow it. A few minutes later, a staff member quietly approached Amara holding a fresh plate. This one had been properly labeled, properly logged, properly assigned. He hesitated before placing it in her hands, as if unsure whether giving it back was enough to fix what had already happened. Amara accepted it without hesitation. "Thank you," she said, not because she needed to forgive anyone, but because she still knew how to speak gently in a room that had forgotten how. Daniel watched her for a long moment before speaking again, softer this time. "Your name will not be moved again without reason," he said. It wasn't a promise made to calm her. It was a rule being rewritten in real time. Later, in a quieter adjoining room, Amara sat at a small table while someone placed a glass of milk beside her plate. She looked at it for a moment before touching it, as if confirming it was allowed to exist there. The noise of the ballroom was now distant, reduced to fragments of celebration returning slowly to order under new supervision. A framed photograph from the event setup was being adjusted on a nearby wall, group pictures of children smiling. With cake, a staff member hesitated before replacing it, glancing at Daniel first. He gave a small nod. Not approval of the image, but permission for it to be corrected. Amara's mother arrived shortly after, escorted not as staff, not as absence, but as someone whose employment file had already been reclassified and restored under emergency review. She stopped when she saw her daughter, then slowly stepped forward as if afraid the moment might still be taken back. Daniel didn't interrupt. He simply watched as Amara stood, walked into her mother's arms, and held on without urgency, as if nothing needed to be proven anymore. The glass of milk remained untouched for a few seconds before Amara finally picked it up with both hands. "They fixed it," she said quietly, not to anyone in particular. Daniel looked at her, then at the room, then at the corrected records now displayed on the tablet beside him. He didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, it wasn't to the system or the staff or the legal team. It was simply a quiet acknowledgement meant for the only voice that had been steady from the beginning. And in the stillness that followed, the truth didn't feel like victory. It felt like something that had finally been allowed to exist without being erased.